Hello there, and welcome to this evening's reading, which is once again from the novel The Things We Know Now. In the last couple of extracts, I read to you about Patrick and Rebecca. And if you remember, Patrick is Rebecca's father from his first marriage. And we heard an extract in which they have a little bit of a confrontation between them. In tonight's extracts, one from the point of view of Patrick and the other is from the point of view of Rebecca. But it's important to say that the novel is actually about Daniel, about Patrick's son with his second wife, Ella. And it's not giving anything away to say that there is a tragedy at the opening of the novel in which Daniel takes his own life. And everybody around him spends a considerable amount of time afterwards wondering about what were the things that they missed, what might they have known that might have helped save this young boy. So, in this first extract, Patrick remembers back to a time when Daniel was a young child, a child of 9, and constant throughout his memories runs this thread of missed opportunity. What might he have known that he missed? What might he have done if he had paid a little bit more attention? When Daniel was 9, I took him sailing with me on his own. I'd hoped that this would be a regular activity for just the two of us. We had 6 Saturdays in a row to spend together, while Ella pursued some training course or other in the city. Daniel had grown somewhat sturdier during the previous winter. For his birthday that February, he had asked for nothing other than a pair of binoculars. That pleased me too. I felt that soon I could teach him the rudiments of photography. I already knew that he had a keen eye. The first Saturday we went to the lake very early. The mist was just rising. There was an eerie stillness. Water, sky, air. Nothing moved. Great stretches of steel blue mist ribboned across the countryside. Can we go to the bird sanctuary? Daniel asked suddenly. Sure we can, I said. When this mist clears, it's going to be a really fine day. You'll have a great view. I smiled at him. He seemed so serious, standing there on the quay wall, watching carefully as I untied the aurora. He looked suddenly small and fragile, and something tugged at my heart. Up on board, I said. We'll have to use the engine, but there should be a bit of a blow later on this afternoon, if we can trust the weather forecast. He jumped lightly onto the deck. His landing barely made a ripple. I started the engine and Daniel fended us off the quay wall. Then he sat and opened up his rucksack. I had made us sandwiches and flasks of soup. I wondered how he could be hungry already, barely an hour after breakfast. But he wasn't interested in the food. Instead, he pulled out a brand new sketchbook, some pencils, a box of charcoal. He placed the binoculars around his neck. I want to try drawing the birds, he said. I've never tried before. Do you think we'll be able to get close enough? His eagerness was touching. We'll do our best, I said. We'll need to sit still and be very patient, though. He nodded. I know that. I'm ready. Do you know what you're looking for yet? Oh, yeah. I've looked up loads of stuff. I smiled. His and Edward's familiarity with technology never ceased to amaze me. It was as though he and his friend had been born with an extra gene, one that is capable of absorbing new things effortlessly rather than having to learn them. His ease with a keyboard, a mouse, even a mobile phone astonished me. I felt slow and fumbling and awkward in comparison. And old. Let us not forget old. I'll read the names to you. Daniel looked over at me. The site says they're all here. You just have to look for them carefully. He flipped back the cover of his sketchpad. Immediately, he began to recite. Blackcap, fieldfare, peregrine, skylark, sparrowhawk, merlin, short-eared owl, stonechat. The stone chat is very rare, but he paused finally and drew breath. The engine fired and sputtered. Right then, I said, let's get underway. We didn't see the stone chat, but we did see a sparrowhawk, some fieldfare, and several skylarks. We crouched in the grasses until I could no longer feel my legs. But Daniel's enthusiasm was infectious. Eventually, I persuaded him to come back to the boat for lunch. We sat in the sunshine, a breeze blowing that would soon become stronger, brisker. I think we might be able to sail back, I said. Would you like that? He nodded, his head already bent over his sketchbook, his sandwich beside him on the seat, uneaten. I watched, silenced by what I was seeing. The birds took flight under his fingers. As he sketched, he moved from pencil to charcoal to occasional vivid whispers of colour. The sketches were not just faithful representations of what we'd seen that morning, sharing the binoculars silently between us. Instead, these birds had real personality, their heads cocked cheekily this way or that, their beady eyes gleaming with some ancient knowledge. They took my breath away. I didn't want to disturb him. The focus, the concentration across his eyes was extraordinary. Suddenly, my son looked older, much older. I felt that I was seeing the face he would grow into. I could see what he would look like as a young man. And then, just as quickly as the vision had appeared, it disappeared. He was a 9-year-old child again. Those are very good, Daniel. Very good indeed. We should frame some for your bedroom. You think? His face lit up. Absolutely. I smiled at him, ruffled his hair. And now I also think it's time to eat that lunch. Get stuck in there, buddy. Eat up, or your mum will have my guts for garters. We had an exciting journey back. The wind gathered in strength and the placid waters of the lake began to make themselves felt in small surges under the bow. The sail flapped and strained, the noise it made suddenly violent and unearthly in that silent place. Daniel responded well to learning the ropes. He was quick, light on his feet. He could anticipate what needed to be done next. We reached the shore just before the late April downpour unleashed itself upon us. Laughing, shouting, trying impossibly to dodge the shower, we tied up the Aurora and raced each other to the car. That was cool, he exclaimed, launching himself into the passenger seat. I laughed. Not only cool, I'm freezing. We're soaked through. I rubbed my hands together, feeling the sticky chill of the rain that trickled down the back of my neck. Can Edward come with us next time? He asked. He wiped his sleeve across his face. His hair stood up in dark, slick spikes. Of course. Any Saturday you wish. I tried to ignore the small sigh of disappointment that ruffled my contentment with the day. It was unworthy, and I knew it. Edward is welcome anytime. And so for the next 5 Saturdays, Edward kept us company. He proved to be a useful little sailor too. Some of that usefulness, I think, came from his eagerness to please me. No matter. Both he and Daniel learned some new skills, and I learned a little more about both of them and their lives. Edward was talkative, more expansive once he was on the water. He became easily absorbed in doing things, a sort of physical activity that seemed to make him forget his shyness. Daniel was content to let him chatter. I observed that for Edward, the joy of those days came from the process of learning, reading the wind, filling the sails, getting to know about ropes and knots, whereas for Daniel, it was something different. Sailing was simply something that brought Daniel to wherever he wished to be, to the bird sanctuary, to the swans, to the autumn woodlands that were ablaze with colour after a particularly icy winter. The journey was simply a means to an end. He filled several sketchbooks that year. I still have them. I look at them from time to time. their contents reminding me of those light-filled Saturdays. When I turn the pages, I can see Daniel again. I can read his happiness in the soaring flight of the sparrowhawk or the curve of the mute swan's elegant neck. At least I have that sure and certain knowledge of my son's happiness. It is the only certainty that I do have. Ella and I will never know the exact nature of the process that drove our sweet boy to despair, that drove him to step bluntly out of his life, out of ours, leaving behind a crushing void that can never be filled. On those earlier days, at least, aboard the Aurora, in my company and with his best friend beside him, my son was happy. There is some comfort in that. Okay, so we move on a little bit to the next extract. And this is where Patrick comes to collect Edward at school one day. And the theme of bullying really appears for the first time. And again, it's giving away nothing to say that this is the life story of a teenager who is literally bullied to death. So, I suspected that that was the end of our conversation for now. He would come back to it again if he needed to. I've always believed that Daniel had a strong sense of social justice. Sorry, it will now appear obvious to you that I changed my mind about the second extract. This is Patrick and Daniel, and where bullying raises its head for the first time. I remember him stepping in to stop a child being bullied in the playground when he was about 7 or 8 years of age. I caught only the tail end of the incident, and that by chance, when I arrived to pick him up after school. At that time, he favoured long, colourful T-shirts with birds and animals emblazoned across the front. They were certainly distinctive. We'd bought him several from a wildlife site on the internet that he liked to visit. As a result, he earned himself the moniker among his schoolmates of T-shirt boy. Excuse me. That afternoon, just as I arrived, a small child was howling in the doorway of a classroom. His mother was crouched down in the corridor trying to console him. T-shirt boy, I heard among the sobs, and I froze. Had Daniel done this? Had he made this small child cry? Just then, my son came bounding up to me, his face flushed, his sweater tied around his waist, his school bag flung over one shoulder. Hiya, Dad. At that moment, the mother stood up. I gripped Daniel's hand firmly, but she didn't look angry. Her approach was a friendly one, and so I waited, curious to see what would happen next. Hello there, she said to Daniel, smiling at both of us. What's your name? Daniel Grant. They call you T-shirt boy, don't they? He nodded. I love the eagle. She reached out one hand and touched Daniel's chest lightly. We just want to say thank you very much. I understand that you helped Anthony when some of the older boys picked on him. Little Anthony was hiccuping, the wire rims of his glasses askew on his elfin face. His cheeks were smeared with snot and tears. I felt sorry for the poor little chap. Daniel shrugged. I said he was my friend, that's all. He tugged at my sleeve, ready to go. Well, thank you. That was a kind thing to do. Anthony's mother and I smiled at each other, and that was that. When we were in the car on the way home, I told Daniel I was proud of him. That was a really good thing you did, son, standing up for the little guy that way. I could see him shrug back at me. It wasn't fair. Jason and James were picking on him, called him Specky Four Eyes. Jesus Christ, I thought, does it never change? The casual playground cruelty brought back so many uncomfortable memories from my own school days that I was taken aback. There are bullies everywhere, I said, catching his eye in the rear view mirror. You did the right thing. And now, some years later, standing on the quay wall waiting for the fish to bite, Daniel's personal mantra had not changed. First Anthony, now Edward, and God alone knows how many others in between. Things weren't fair. Right now was not the time to suggest to Daniel that he cultivate other friendships. Ella and I had already spoken of this, but only to each other. We both loved Edward. He was a very lovable child, but we worried that Daniel would isolate himself by such an exclusive friendship. He needed others, if only to play second fiddle when Edward wasn't available. My own memories of school returned yet again to niggle at me. After one particular incident on the rugby pitch, of which more anon, when I broke Pete Mackey's jaw, the other boys pretty much left me alone. For almost 3 years, I endured an isolation that I can still remember, an acute loneliness that accompanied me for the grim remainder of my days at school. I watched my son as he concentrated on the fishing rod in his hands, barely moving, his attention focused on the water below. Well, I said, let's make sure we invite Edward for the next week, and maybe another boy or two if you'd like. But he never answered. At that moment, there was an almighty tug on the rod, and it bent forward in a wide, graceful arc, sweeping downwards towards the surface of the water. I leapt to my feet. Hold on tight. Pull the rod upwards, Daniel, and keep pulling back. I rushed to his side. He was shrieking with excitement. Help me, Dad, help me. I put one hand over his, and together we landed the trout, gasping and wriggling, onto the flat surface of the pier. The fish flailed wildly, arcing its back. Watch out, I called, or it'll throw itself back into the lake. I got hold at last of the gleaming silvery body. I could feel the small heart beating wildly under the shiny surface. I watched the gills expand and contract. As gently as I could, I removed the hook from the fish's mouth. Well done, I said to Daniel, and he grinned. Now it's your call. We can throw it back after we take a photo, of course, or we can have it for supper. It's up to you. Back, he said without hesitation. Let's do it quick, or it mightn't survive. He pulled his mobile out of his pocket. I held the fish as he took the picture. Put it back, Dad. He said, do it now. We got down on our hands and knees, and I slipped the heaving body back into the waters of the lake. Daniel and I both watched as the fish seemed stunned for an instant, testing its new environment as though it couldn't believe its luck. Then, with one twist, one flash of its undulating body, it was gone. You're a fisherman, I said. Your granddad would be proud of you. I was glad to see that Daniel's face had cleared. None of the former anguish remained. Instead, his cheeks were flushed, his eyes bright. That was cool, he said. Wait till I tell Edward. We sat together, each of us perched precariously on a corner of the upturned beer crate. We had our lunch and talked of fishing and sailing and spinners and feathers. When we didn't speak, we sat in companionable silence. Afterwards, we baited the hook again, and Daniel had another go, but I sensed his heart wasn't in it. He'd been troubled by the removal of the hook from the fleshy inside of the trout's mouth. Does it hurt them? He asked. I guess so, I said, although some people say not as much as you would imagine. They're supposed to have different nerve endings, but I don't know. He nodded. I'm glad we put him back. I'll be able to draw him from the photo. It's not fair to kill him. It wasn't long before the clouds began to gather in the east, just as George had said they would. Let's go, I said. I think we should make tracks before the weather changes. You'll have time if you want to cycle over to Edward's and show him the photo before dinner. We made it back to Casey's yard just before the first fat drops of rain began to fall. There was an ominous rumble in the east. I have searched over and over again for some significance in all the conversations that I can recall with Daniel over the last 2 years of his life. I drive myself mad. looking for answers and all the questions that I might have missed. Once he went to secondary school, he changed. Not immediately, and not even all at once, but he changed. Gradually, the child I knew became transformed into someone else, and not just into an adolescent. That would have been natural. As the father of 3 daughters, I was already inured to the slamming door, the mutinous silence, the outbursts of temper. It was something else with Daniel, something I then did not know. But that is no excuse. I should have known, should have seen what was already so familiar to me from my own boyhood. I didn't. And now I have to live with that. Would I have spotted earlier that things were gravely wrong? Excuse me, had Daniel been a girl? This, like so many other questions, is impossible to answer. And after Daniel died, I could not ever ask them of Ella. Of the 2 of us, I believe her burden of perceived guilt to be the heavier. She will never forgive herself. How could I not have known? How could I not have seen it, my own child? She said this or something like it over and over again. Nor will I forgive myself. But then there is so much more that I have to feel guilty about, responsible for, things I may never be able to tell my wife. Okay, so I'm going to leave it there, and that's the third and final extract from The Things We Know Now, but it's not the end of the readings. I'm really happy to tell you that my next novel, called The Years That Followed, you think I'd know, The Years That Followed, is a book club subscription for the Bealtaine book club, which has the hashtag Bealtaine at Home. So along with Neil Hegarty's beautiful novel, The Jewel, I will be doing 8 readings throughout the month of May. On this channel, it's the same link as always, and those readings will start next Tuesday. So please look up the Bealtaine Book Club. It has its own page on Facebook. Join up and read along with us. One of the themes is resilience, and the curator of the Bealtaine Book Club event is Mia Gallagher. And Mia has chosen several other volumes that you can read to keep us company as we go through the month, exploring themes such as resilience and survival. So thank you very much for your company. Thank you for your comments. Keep on keeping in touch as always. And I think we just have to stay at home just a little bit longer. But sure, if we can't travel anywhere in the real world, we can travel to plenty of places in our imagination. Thanks for joining me this evening, and I look forward to your company again next Tuesday at 7:30. Stay safe, everybody, and stay well in the meantime. All the best for now.